think that uh, the modern person thinks about greatness for the most part incorrectly, in the sense that whoever is the greatest player in the present, in theory, is the greatest player of all time because of the way training changes and nutrition changes. And
it's like cars. The 2026 best Porsche is probably better than the 1976 best Porsche.
So when you're talking about the greatness of anything, and there are exceptions, and I'm sure you're going to pick some up as soon as I say this, but when I'm thinking, if someone asks me like, what is the greatest whatever in anything, any subject, what I'm trying to do is think of what is the earliest incarnation of greatness that's still present in the modern version. So it's like the earliest version of something that was great, indisputably great, that still exists in every version that comes after. And my argument with Jim Thorpe
So it's like a prototype GOAT.
Well, a little bit. I mean, because otherwise the argument over greatness...
Or it's GOAT Ground Zero.
It's kind of meaningless.
I like GOAT Ground Zero is kind of where you're going, right?
I guess. That way I would be... Yes, if I could have called it that, I guess. I think that is the way greatness needs to be considered. It has to be like... we always want to think of the future, but greatness comes from the past. It's sort of like the building blocks of these things. I use the Beatles as the example in this book, not, unsurprisingly. Sort of like what makes the Beatles so great is that not only what they did, but sort of what they did is still completely present in all the pop music that came after. Now, granted, sports are different. Sports have a greater objective element than a subjective element, and people will talk about this. To me, it really came down to Jim Thorpe or Jim Brown, because I think the argument could be made that the sport Jim Thorpe was playing had no relationship to the sport we have now. Whereas Jim Brown, we're playing, we have the platoon system, we're wearing face masks, it's a little closer. But when Jim Thorpe played, it was an 11-on-11 sport. Touchdowns for 6 points. The first down was 10 yards. There was passing. There was strategy. All these things were there. Like the rudimentary elements of football were there. And he was the first great player. And that makes him the great player forever.
So by this argument, Bill Russell is the GOAT of basketball.
Well, that's a really interesting one, because I do think that in the same way that football has, had these different kind of hinge points, it does seem to me like there was a real hinge point in basketball with the NBA-ABA merger and the addition of the three-point goal in this period in the late 70s. I think that basketball dramatically changed the idea that it added a way to score that had never before existed, an extra point for a three-point goal. So I think from that way, you could really look at basketball having these two chunks. In the first chunk, I think it probably would be Wilt Chamberlain. And I think in the second chunk, it would be Michael Jordan.
Wilt Chamberlain, if you like losing at the end of the season?
Sure. I mean, the thing is that you factor in, I think you actually overemphasize the...
wins and losses?
The outcome. As opposed
titles?
As opposed to the process. Yes, I do.
But the same Jim Thorpe argument you make in the book for pages is the exact same argument you can make for Bill Russell. Like, he introduced the entire concept of defense, fast break, something running through a center and everybody running off them. Everything they did in the late 50s and early 60s became basketball. I mean, and he won the title every year.
You could absolutely make a very strong argument that if you had to pick one of those guys to be on your team, Russell would be the guy to pick. The fact that every time they squared up against each other, it seemed like Russell got the better of him, despite the fact the rosters weren't really the same. But even
no, I debunk that. The rosters were just as good.
I totally understand that. What I'm talking about is sort of like the archetype of the basketball player. The ability to do the rudimentary elements of basketball: score the ball, rebound the ball, pass the ball, play
defense,
move up and down the court. Okay. I believe, and I wrote this in your book, I believe that Wilt Chamberlain with a different mindset could have been Bill Russell. I do not believe Bill Russell with a different mindset could have been Wilt Chamberlain. I don't think that. Now, I in the same way that
I disagreed with it when it was in my book.
Yeah. I mean, so you think that if Bill Russell had been a more sort of selfish, self-oriented,
I just think he did
what he scored 100 points in a game.
I just think he figured out the best. How do I win a basketball game? How do I use my teammates? How do I use opponents' deficiencies against them?
Within the context of
how do I win?
Yes, and basketball is a team sport, so you could make the argument that his ability to figure out what was the best way to do this within the confines of this 5-on-5 game or whatever, that should be. We can't discount that, right? You can't discount.
So, if we were doing ground zero goats, Thorpe's for football, I think Russell's basketball, and Babe Ruth's obviously baseball.
Mm-hmm. I would say those two, but Chamberlain instead of Russell. Yes.
All right, I'm discounting Chamberlain, and then hockey.
Hockey's one
hockey gets tougher.
Mentioned. I think Gretzky is the greatest hockey player of all time, even though by my logic here, it should be Bobby Orr or somebody. But like I said, there's always going to be exceptions. It would be there's no theory that on greatness that's so airtight that there are no flaws, unless the only argument that would be someone who makes the argument that the greatest person in every medium is whoever is the greatest right now, because humanity always advances. So somebody could make that argument, and then you can't really disagree with that. You can't.
Well,
but I don't
you talked about Moss, and you talked about how you thought Moss. He was the best
player that I ever saw. To me, Randy Moss was the greatest football player I saw with my eyes.
So the 4 best football players I ever saw were Randy Moss, Jerry Rice, Lawrence Taylor, and Tom Brady, and not in that order.
Okay.
And I actually think Jerry Rice, I would have, if you could just give me a receiver for their career.
Absolutely.
And I'd have the best chance to win. It has to be Jerry Rice. Okay. Moss, you made the point. Moss had these physical gifts. That year he was on the Pats, those first 2 months, it was like, I've never had an experience like that as a fan. And there was something, he passed the stadium test too. If you went to actually see him in a game, it was unforgettable to just watch him run. And it just seemed, he was the only football player I've ever seen where it actually seemed kind of unfair that he was to the defense, that he was out there, right?
Yeah, I mean, this book is like, in some ways, it's like a book of criticism about a sport. In the same way that you. So the rules, I admittedly are my rules, right? So look at Jerry Rice and Randy Moss. For a career, no question, Moss is greater. For a season, for a career,
Rice is better.
Okay. For a career, Rice is clearly better. For a season, Rice is better. I think potentially for an important game, Rice is better. But for a play, nobody's better than Moss.
Well, you wrote about my favorite Patriots play of all time, which was an incompletion.
I think it was third down. I ever saw in my life. Yeah.
Giants Super Bowl. I was at the game. Everyone in the arena knew it was coming. They double teamed him. He ran as fast as he could for 60 yards.